Fixing a shattered phone screen for a notoriously ruthless billionaire CEO was supposed to be just another standard job for Alaric, a struggling single father and freelance tech repairman. He had no idea the damaged device held the dark, terrifying truth about the worst day of his life. As the phone finally booted up, an unsent photo flashed on the display, not revealing a corporate scandal, but a ghost that would change absolutely everything. The smell of burnt rosin core solder and cheap instant coffee always meant one thing to Alaric Burlington: survival. At 34, Alaric's world had shrunk to the size of a cluttered workbench in a cramped, two-bedroom apartment on the dampest side of Seattle. He adjusted the magnification on his digital microscope, his calloused fingers delicately maneuvering a pair of titanium tweezers. Beneath the lens lay the fried logic board of an overpriced smartphone, its microscopic components resembling a sprawling, ruined city. "Dad, I can't find my green shoe," Alaric blinked, pulling his eyes away from the bright glare of the monitor. He pushed his safety glasses up into his messy brown hair and turned around. Standing in the doorway of the makeshift office was Toby, 5 years old, wearing mismatched socks and a superhero pajama top that was getting a little too tight around the shoulders. Alaric's chest tightened, a familiar pang of fierce, protective love mixed with a hollow grief. Toby had his mother's eyes, a piercing, intelligent hazel. It had been exactly 3 years, 2 months, and 14 days since Megan was killed. A rainy Tuesday evening, a slick crosswalk, and a speeding car that never bothered to hit the brakes. The police called it a tragic hit and run. They closed the case after 6 months due to a lack of actionable evidence. Alaric called it a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. "Your green shoe is under the radiator in the kitchen, buddy," Alaric said, forcing a warm smile as he set his tweezers down. "Remember? You used it as a garage for your toy trucks last night." Toby's face lit up. "Oh, right. Thanks, Dad." He scurried off, his small footsteps echoing on the cheap linoleum floor. Alaric rubbed his tired eyes. He needed to finish this repair. He was an independent contractor for Elite Tech Solutions, a boutique tech repair firm that catered exclusively to Seattle's ultra-wealthy. They handled the devices of politicians, celebrities, and corporate titans, people who couldn't walk into a standard retail store because the data on their phones could shift the stock market or ruin lives. Alaric was their best micro-soldering expert. He was also their most desperate. Between Toby's daycare costs and the mountain of debt left over from Megan's funeral and his subsequent legal battles against the city for street camera footage, Alaric was drowning. His phone buzzed, vibrating violently against the metal work desk. The caller ID flashed. "Andrew, dispatch." Alaric picked it up. "Tell me you have good news. Dave. Tell me this motherboard I'm working on is the last one for the day." "Drop the board, Artie!" Andrew's voice barked through the receiver, tight and urgent. "I've got a code red, on site, immediate dispatch." Alaric sighed, glancing at the clock. It was already 4:30 p.m. "Dave, I have to pick Toby up from Mrs. Higgins downstairs in an hour. I can't do an on-site right now." "You can, and you will," Andrew insisted, his tone dropping to a serious whisper. "This is Beatrice Kensington." Alaric froze. Beatrice Kensington, the CEO of Kensington Global, a ruthless real estate and private equity conglomerate that owned half the commercial skyline of Seattle. She was notoriously private, notoriously demanding, and frighteningly powerful. The media called her the Iron Widow after her husband passed away a decade ago. "What does she need?" Alaric asked cautiously. "Her personal, off-the-grid device," Andrew explained. "She dropped it in a marble elevator shaft or something. Smashed to hell. Total blackout. She refuses to hand it over to her internal IT department. Security protocols. She wants an independent contractor, bonded and NDA bound, to fix it in her presence. Right now, at the Kensington Heights penthouse. Dave, Listen to me, Artie. The hazard pay and rush premium on this single job will cover 3 months of your rent. She's paying 10 times our usual rate just to have it done before her 8 p.m. dinner meeting. You want to pay off those lawyers you hired. This is it. Alaric looked down the hallway. He could hear Toby making engine noises in the kitchen. 3 months of rent, breathing room, a chance to finally hire a private investigator to look into Megan's case again. Call Mrs. Higgins, Alaric said, his voice steadying. Tell her I'll pay double if she watches Toby until 8. Send me the address. The Kensington Heights building was a towering monolith of black glass and steel that pierced the overcast Seattle sky. Alaric stood in the private underground parking garage, clutching his heavy Pelican case of tools, feeling entirely out of place in his faded flannel shirt and work boots amidst a sea of Maybachs and armored SUVs. A man in a sharp black suit with an earpiece patted him down meticulously, checking the pockets of his jeans and running a metal wand over his tool case. You understand the protocol. Mr. Burlington, the head of security, a broad-shouldered man named Gregory, said in a monotone voice. No external drives, no wireless transmitters. If you attempt to connect her device to any network, we will know, and you will be detained. You fix the screen. You ensure the logic board is stable. You turn it on so she can verify her data, and you leave. I fix phones, man. I don't steal secrets. Alaric muttered, grabbing his case. He was escorted into a private elevator that shot up 70 floors with stomach-churning speed. When the doors slid open, Alaric stepped into a penthouse that looked less like a home and more like a modern art museum. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a dizzying, panoramic view of the rain-soaked city. The floors were polished dark stone, and the air smelled faintly of expensive cedar and ozone. Sitting behind a massive slab of petrified wood that served as a desk was Beatrice Kensington. She was in her late 40s, dressed in an immaculate, tailored white suit that stood out starkly against the gray backdrop of the city behind her. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a severe, perfect chignon. She didn't look up from the tablet in her hands when Alaric entered. Standing beside her was a younger woman in a gray pencil skirt, holding a clipboard like a shield. Mr. Burlington, the assistant said briskly. I am Chloe, Ms. Kensington's executive assistant. You have your non-disclosure agreement. Signed and digitally submitted on the ride up, Alaric replied, setting his heavy case on a glass coffee table. Beatrice finally looked up. Her eyes were an icy, penetrating blue. They held no warmth, no humanity, just calculation. I don't care about the screen, Mr. Burlington, she said, her voice smooth but laced with absolute authority. I care about the data. The phone was crushed in the doors of my private lift. If the motherboard is cracked, I need you to micro-solder the memory chip onto a donor board. Can you do it? Alaric stepped closer, looking at the device resting on a velvet tray on the desk. It was a high-end, custom-built Android device, clad in aerospace-grade titanium. The screen was completely pulverized, shattered into a spiderweb of glass dust, and the chassis was slightly bent. I need to open it up to see, Alaric said, pulling on his anti-static gloves. If the memory chip itself is cracked, no one can save it. If it's just the board traces, I can bypass them. Do it! You have 1 hour, Beatrice commanded, returning her gaze to her tablet. Alaric set up his portable workstation. He deployed his high-powered magnifying lamp, his portable hot air rework station, and his precision screwdrivers. The penthouse was deathly silent. save for the faint hum of the city far below and the clicking of Beatrice's manicured nails against her screen. Gregory, the security guard, stood 3 feet behind Alaric, watching his every move like a hawk. Alaric worked with a surgeon's precision. He heated the edges of the destroyed phone, carefully lifting the crushed glass away from the delicate internals. He disconnected the battery, his heart rate steadying as muscle memory took over. This was his domain. The microscopic pathways of power and data made sense to him in a way the real world rarely did. He extracted the motherboard. Holding it under his magnifying lamp, he let out a slow breath. "Well?" Chloe asked sharply. "The board is bent," Alaric said, his eyes scanning the micro-components. "But the CPU and the memory module are intact. The flex cable connecting the display was severed, and there's a short in the power delivery IC. I need to replace the power chip and attach a new display assembly." "Fix it," Beatrice said, not looking up. For the next 45 minutes, Alaric was in the zone. He used his micro-soldering iron to remove the damaged power chip, the tiny bead of liquid metal shining under the harsh LED light. He pulled a replacement chip from his extensive parts organizer, aligning it perfectly on the microscopic solder pads, and hit it with a blast of 350-degree air until it flowed into place. He attached a pristine test screen from his inventory. "All right," Alaric said, his voice raspy from concentration. "I'm connecting the battery. We're going to try a boot sequence." Beatrice finally set her tablet down, leaning forward slightly. The absolute intensity in her eyes made Alaric's skin prickle. Whatever was on this phone, it was worth millions, maybe billions. Alaric held down the power button. For a terrifying 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then the screen flickered, and a crisp, white manufacturer logo appeared on the display. Chloe let out a small breath of relief. Beatrice's expression remained entirely unreadable. "It's booting," Alaric said. "The touch digitizer is responsive. You'll need to enter your passcode." He wiped the screen with a microfiber cloth and slid the device across the desk toward the CEO. Beatrice took it, her fingers moving in a rapid, complex pattern across the glass. The phone unlocked, but because the operating system had just recovered from a catastrophic hardware crash, it didn't go to the home screen. Instead, the OS lagged, glitching for a fraction of a second as it restored the last active application before the device was crushed. The application was the photo gallery, and the image that filled the bright 6-inch screen hit Alaric Burlington with the force of a freight train. Alaric stopped breathing. The ambient noise of the penthouse, the hum of the air conditioning, the rustle of Chloe's skirt, vanished entirely, replaced by a deafening, high-pitched ringing in his ears. Beatrice quickly swiped the screen away, closing the app and locking the phone. But it was too late. Alaric had a photographic memory for details, a byproduct of staring at microscopic circuit boards for 10 hours a day. It only took 1 second for the image to burn itself permanently into his retinas. It was a photograph of a car, parked in what looked like a private, poorly lit concrete garage. A custom, charcoal gray, Aston Martin DB11. The front right bumper was heavily damaged, crushed inward, with a deep, violent scrape along the hood. The license plate was clearly visible, Ken's 1. But that wasn't what made the blood turn to ice in Alaric's veins. It was the metadata overlay that the gallery app displayed in the top right corner of the screen before Beatrice closed it. A white digital stamp showing the exact date and time the photo was taken. October 12th, 11:43 p.m. Alaric's hands began to tremble. He quickly plunged them into his pockets, digging his nails into his own palms until they ached. October 12th, 3 years ago, the night Megan was killed. She was struck at exactly 11:15 p.m. on the corner of 4th and Pike. The police had told Alaric they found traces of charcoal gray automotive paint on Megan's coat. They said it was a high-end vehicle, but they couldn't identify the make or model because the street cameras had conveniently undergone routine network maintenance during that exact 20-minute window. They told Alaric it was a dead end, and here it was, the murder weapon, sitting in the palm of Beatrice Kensington's hand. "The device appears to be functioning perfectly," Beatrice said coldly, her voice breaking through Alaric's paralysis. She slipped the phone into her designer handbag. "Chloe, ensure Mr. Burlington is compensated for his time. Add a 20% gratuity for his discretion." "Yes, Ms. Kensington," Chloe said. She turned to Alaric, pulling a sleek leather checkbook from her portfolio. Alaric couldn't speak. His throat felt like it was filled with broken glass. He stared at Beatrice, this elegant, untouchable woman sitting behind $1 million desk. She had killed his wife, or she knew who did. And she had the power and the money to completely erase the crime, to buy the police, to shut off the city cameras, to leave a young mother bleeding on the asphalt while she drove back to her ivory tower. "Mr. Burlington?" Chloe asked, her brow furrowing as she noticed him staring blankly. "Are you unwell?" Alaric snapped back to reality. Survival. If he reacted now, if he accused her, he would never leave this building. Gregory, the security guard, was already eyeing him suspiciously, shifting his weight. "I'm fine," Alaric croaked, forcing himself to cough into his fist. "Sorry, the solder fumes, sometimes they catch up with you. Just need some water." "You can get water on the ground floor," Gregory said flatly, stepping forward. "Pack up your gear." Alaric nodded numbly. He turned back to his workstation and began disassembling his tools. Every motion felt robotic. His mind was racing at 1,000,000 miles an hour. He needed proof. A fleeting glance at a screen wouldn't hold up in court. No judge in Seattle would issue a warrant against Beatrice Kensington based on the word of a struggling phone repairman. As he placed his micro-soldering iron back into its heat-resistant slot, his eyes landed on the crushed, original motherboard he had extracted from Beatrice's phone. When Beatrice dropped the phone in the elevator, it had shattered the screen and bent the board. But the memory chip was intact. Alaric had transferred the primary CPU and memory module to a donor board to make the phone work. But high-end devices like Beatrice's custom model utilized a secondary, what's secure enclave chip, a smaller memory module that continuously backed up cache data, thumbnails, and encrypted metadata for quick recovery. It was still attached to the bent, discarded logic board sitting on his anti-static mat. To anyone else, it looked like a worthless piece of green fiberglass and broken silicone. Alaric's heart pounded violently against his ribs. With a sleight of hand honed from years of manipulating millimeter-wide screws, Alaric palmed the broken motherboard in one fluid motion as he reached for a roll of electrical tape. He slipped the board up the sleeve of his flannel shirt. "All packed," Alaric said, zipping the Pelican case shut with his other hand. His voice sounded remarkably steady, completely detached from the absolute hurricane of rage and grief spiraling inside him. Chloe handed him an envelope. "Your payment, Mr. Burlington, as a reminder, the non-disclosure agreement you signed covers not only the nature of this repair but the existence of this penthouse, the make of the device, and Kensington's presence in the city today. Any breach will result in immediate and overwhelming legal action." Alaric took the envelope. It felt heavy. Blood money. "I understand completely," Alaric said, looking past Chloe to meet Beatrice's icy blue eyes one last time. "You don't have to worry about me. I'm just a guy who fixes broken things." Beatrice didn't reply. She had already dismissed his existence entirely. returning her focus to her tablet. Gregory escorted Alaric back to the private elevator. The descent was a blur. When Alaric finally stepped out into the damp, cold Seattle evening, the rain was coming down in sheets. He walked 3 blocks away from the towering glass skyscraper before he finally stopped in the shadow of a brick alleyway. He dropped his heavy tool case into a puddle. He leaned against the rough brick wall, pulled the broken motherboard from his sleeve, and stared at it. His hands shook violently as a single, ragged sob tore from his throat. For 3 years, he had told Toby that Mommy was in heaven, that accidents happen, that sometimes the world is just unfair. But it wasn't an accident. It was a crime, and it had been covered up by a woman who tipped him 20% to keep his mouth shut. Alaric tightly gripped the broken piece of silicon. The sadness was evaporating, burning away under the heat of something entirely new, something dark and unyielding. He wasn't going to hire a lawyer. He wasn't going to go to the police. The police had already been bought. Alaric Burlington was going to extract the data from this chip. He was going to find out exactly who Beatrice Kensington was hiding, who she had paid off, and how deep the corruption ran. And then he was going to dismantle her life, piece by piece, just like a broken machine. The heavy metal door of Alaric's apartment clicked shut, the deadbolt sliding into place with a hollow thud. He leaned his forehead against the cold steel, closing his eyes, listening to the rhythmic, comforting sound of Toby's breathing from the bedroom down the short hallway. Mrs. Higgins had already put him to bed, taking the envelope of cash Alaric offered with a sympathetic nod, before shuffling back down to her ground-floor unit. Alaric walked into his makeshift office, shedding his wet flannel jacket. The adrenaline that had carried him out of the Kensington Heights skyscraper was wearing off, replaced by a cold, hyper-focused clarity. He flipped the switch on his workbench power strip. The monitors hummed to life, casting a pale blue glow over the cluttered room. He took the broken green motherboard from his pocket and set it down on his silicone soldering mat. This was no ordinary data recovery. The secure Enclave chip, a tiny square of black epoxy and silicon, no larger than a fingernail, was designed to self-destruct its encryption keys if tampered with. Standard extraction methods would wipe the data instantly. Alaric needed to trick the chip into thinking it was still connected to its native CPU, supplying it with the exact voltage and clock signals it expected. He pulled a blank developer board from his locked cabinet, an expensive piece of hardware he usually reserved for forensic data recovery for high-paying corporate clients. "All right, Beatrice," Alaric whispered to the empty room. "Let's see what you left behind." Using his microscope and a soldering iron, tipped with a micro-pencil element, Alaric went to work. He ran jumper wires thinner than a human hair from the microscopic pads on the Kensington chip to the corresponding terminals on his developer board. It was agonizing, tedious work. One slip of the tweezers, 1 millivolt of overcurrent, and the evidence of his wife's murder would vanish into digital static forever. Hours bled away. Outside, the Seattle rain battered against the window panes. By 2:15 a.m., Alaric made the final connection. He took a deep breath, his finger hovering over the power supply switch. He flicked it on. His custom Linux machine chimed. A string of command-line text scrolled rapidly down his primary monitor. Secure enclave detected. Initiating handshake protocol. Bypassing kernel panic. Mounting cache partition. Success. Alaric exhaled sharply, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. He had a back door into the phone's temporary memory, the shadow data the system used to render thumbnails and index searches. It wasn't the full storage drive, but it held the ghosts of recently accessed files and deleted metadata. He ran an extraction script, dumping the fragmented files into a raw folder on his desktop. Hundreds of images, encrypted text logs, and location pings populated the screen. Alaric immediately filtered the data by date. October 12th, 3 years ago. The thumbnail of the crushed Aston Martin DB11 appeared. Alaric clicked it, viewing the high-resolution metadata. But this time, he saw something else. Appended to the photo was a string of SMS cache data, a text message chain sent just 3 minutes before the photo was taken. Alaric's eyes scanned the text, his heart hammering against his ribs. Sender, Leo K. B. I messed up. I messed up bad. 4th and Pike. She stepped out of nowhere. Recipient, Beatrice. K. Where are you? Are you at the private garage? Sender, Leo K. Yes, the car is ruined. There's blood on the hood. B. I've been drinking. If the cops come, I'm going to prison. My parole will be revoked. Recipient, Beatrice K. Shut up and listen to me. Leave the keys in the ignition. Do not speak to anyone. I am calling Captain Miller now. The cameras will go dark in 3 minutes. You were at my estate in Medina all night. Alaric gripped the edge of his desk so hard his knuckles turned white. Leo K. Leo Kensington. Beatrice's notorious younger brother. The tabloid bad boy who had a history of reckless driving, substance abuse, and highly publicized scandals that his sister's PR team always managed to magically erase. Beatrice hadn't killed Megan. She had orchestrated the cover-up to protect her parasitic brother. And she had help. Captain Miller. Alaric pulled up a browser window, his fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard. He searched the Seattle Police Department roster. Captain Thomas Miller, 4th Precinct, the exact precinct that had handled Megan's hit-and-run case. The man who had personally signed the paperwork closing the investigation, due to lack of evidence. The rage that washed over Alaric wasn't hot and chaotic. It was freezing cold. It was absolute. He didn't just have proof of the driver. He had proof of a systemic, high-level conspiracy involving the chief of police and the most powerful woman in the state. He continued digging through the cache, finding banking app thumbnails. One image was a screenshot of a wire transfer confirmation sent the morning of October 13th. $500,000 transferred from a Kensington Global Shell account to an offshore trust. Alaric compiled all the files, screenshots and metadata logs, moving them onto 3 separate encrypted flash drives. Suddenly, a loud, jarring sound shattered the silence of the apartment. His burner phone, the one he used strictly for elite tech dispatch, was ringing. Alaric glanced at the clock. It was 3:45 a.m. Andrew never called at this hour unless someone was dying. Yeah, Alaric answered, keeping his voice low. Artie, you need to listen to me, and you need to not interrupt. Andrew's voice came through the speaker, breathless and laced with absolute panic. Background noise echoed behind him, the sound of slamming file cabinets and heavy footsteps. Dave, what's going on? Are you at the shop? They're here. Artie, Kensington's people. They came through the back door 5 minutes ago. That massive security guy, Gregory, and 3 guys who looked like off-duty mercenaries. Alaric felt a cold stone drop in his stomach. What do they want? The internal IT guys at Kensington Heights ran a deep diagnostic on the phone you repaired, Andrew whispered frantically. They realized the secure enclave chip is missing. They know you swapped the main logic module, but pocketed the secondary board. Gregory has my collar. Artie, he's asking for your address. I told him our system is down, but they're tearing apart the filing cabinets to find your contractor W9. Dave, do not give them my address. Call the police. The police? Andrew, let out a hysterical, choked laugh. There are 2 uniformed officers standing by the front door watching them trash my office. They're in on it. I can't hold them off. Man, you need to run. Get Toby and get out of there. Now. The line went dead. Alaric stared at the phone. He had vastly underestimated Beatrice Kensington's paranoia and efficiency. She didn't just buy off detectives, she owned the response teams. The realization that cops were actively assisting her security chief meant Alaric was entirely on his own. The system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as it was designed to, for the people who could afford it. He had maybe 20 minutes before they found his file. Maybe less. Alaric sprinted to the bedroom. Toby was fast asleep, clutching a stuffed dinosaur, completely oblivious to the fact that the walls of their life were collapsing. Alaric grabbed a duffel bag from the closet. He moved with practiced, frantic efficiency. He packed Toby's clothes, his favorite toys, the medical records, and all the cash he had hidden in a hollowed-out book on his shelf. He threw in his own clothes, grabbing his heavy winter jacket. Next, he went to the kitchen. He took a heavy iron skillet and smashed the burner phone, tossing the shattered pieces into the trash. They couldn't track him through a dead device, but they could trace his IP if he stayed connected to the home network. He rushed back to the office, ripped the hard drives out of his desktop computer, and tossed them into his bag along with the 3 encrypted USB drives containing the Kensington data. He gently shook his son's shoulder. Toby. Hey, buddy. Wake up. Toby groaned, rubbing his eyes. Dad, is it morning? Not yet, Bud. We're going on a trip, an adventure. I need you to put your shoes on, really fast. Toby, sensing the tension in his father's voice despite Alaric's attempt at a calm tone, nodded and sat up. Alaric pulled out his personal cell phone. He dialed the one person he could trust implicitly, his late wife's sister, Sarah. She lived in a rural logging town 3 hours east of Seattle, completely off the grid and fiercely independent. Artie? Sarah answered, her voice groggy. Do you know what time it is? Sarah, I need you to do exactly as I say. I'm bringing Toby to you. I'm leaving right now. What? Alaric, you're scaring me. What happened? I found out who killed Megan, Alaric said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. And, I know. I can't explain everything right now, but they're powerful, and they are coming for me. I need you to keep Toby safe while I blow this thing wide open. There was a pause on the line. The sleepy confusion vanished from Sarah's voice, replaced by cold steel. Bring him. I'll have the gate open and the coffee on. And Artie, I have my shotgun loaded. Thanks. Sarah, see you in 3 hours. Alaric hung up. He hoisted the duffel bag over his shoulder, grabbed his heavy steel wrench from the tool chest, and slipped it into his belt loop. He grabbed Toby's hand, leading him out of the apartment. As they walked down the hallway to the stairwell, Alaric heard the distinct sound of a heavy engine pulling into the alleyway directly beneath his bedroom window. He froze. He crept to the hallway window and peered down through the grimy glass. A sleek, black SUV idled in the alley. 4 men stepped out into the rain. 3 were wearing tactical gear over dark clothes. The 4th was Gregory, Beatrice Kensington's head of security, holding a heavy, suppressed pistol by his side. They had found the address faster than he thought. They were already at the front door of the apartment complex. Panic, sharp and blinding, clawed at Alaric's throat. He pulled Toby back from the window, pressing the boy against the wall. Dad, why are we hiding? Toby whispered, his eyes wide. We're playing a game. Toby, Alaric said, forcing his voice to remain steady. It's called shadows. We have to be as quiet as mice. Can you do that for me? Toby nodded solemnly. putting a finger over his lips. Alaric looked at the stairwell door. They lived on the 3rd floor. Gregory's men would undoubtedly take the stairs, splitting up to cover the exits. If Alaric tried to go down, they would walk right into a kill box. The fire escape was rusted and rattled, loud enough to wake the dead. He had to create a diversion. He needed to buy exactly 3 minutes to get down to his battered Honda Civic, parked in the subterranean resident lot. Alaric dragged Toby back inside their apartment, locking the deadbolt once more. He rushed to his electronics workbench. He had raw lithium-ion battery cells, volatile, high-capacity batteries used for custom power banks. He grabbed 4 of them. He took a heavy roll of copper wire and an old, mechanical kitchen timer. His hands moved with lightning speed, splicing the wires, connecting the positive and negative terminals in a deliberate short-circuit sequence. He set the timer for 45 seconds. "Come on," he muttered, twisting the final connection. When a high-capacity lithium battery is shorted without a protection circuit, it undergoes thermal runaway. It vents thick, toxic, blinding white smoke before violently combusting. Alaric placed the rigged bundle directly inside the apartment's main air vent, which connected to the hallway. He grabbed Toby and his duffel bag, moving to the back window that overlooked the rusted fire escape. Click, click, click. The timer ticked down. Heavy, synchronized footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. Thud. A fist pounded on his apartment door. "Alaric Burlington," Gregory's voice boomed through the cheap wood. "Open the door. We just want to talk about a missing piece of hardware." Alaric hoisted Toby onto his back. "Hold on tight. Monkey, don't let go." Tick, 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 ding. Inside the air vent, the copper wire glowed white-hot, instantly melting the battery casings. A loud "hiss" echoed through the apartment, followed by an explosion of dense, noxious white smoke. The smoke poured out of the vents, immediately flooding the narrow 3rd-floor hallway. Outside the door, chaos erupted. "What the hell is that?" one of the mercenaries yelled, violently coughing. "Breach the door! Breach it now!" Gregory barked. A heavy boot kicked the deadbolt. The wood splintered with a deafening crack. As the door gave way, Alaric kicked open the back window and scrambled out onto the fire escape. The cold Seattle rain hit him instantly, slicking the metal steps. He didn't look back. He scrambled down the iron grating, Toby clinging to his neck from above. He heard the sharp, suppressed pft of gunfire as Gregory's men shot blindly into the smoke-filled apartment. Expecting an ambush, Alaric hit the alley floor, his boots splashing in a deep puddle. He sprinted toward the entrance of the underground parking garage, keeping to the shadows. He could hear alarms ringing from his building, the smoke detectors finally triggering. Sirens wailed in the distance. He reached his Honda, practically throwing the duffel bag into the passenger seat. He buckled Toby into the back, his hands shaking so violently he could barely manage the clasp. He jumped into the driver's seat and jammed the key into the ignition. The old engine sputtered, coughed, and roared to life. He threw it into reverse, tires squealing against the wet concrete, and shot up the ramp toward the street level. As he cleared the garage exit, he saw the black SUV parked near the alley entrance. One of the mercenaries was standing by the driver's side door, scanning the street. The man locked eyes with Alaric through the windshield. He immediately reached for the radio on his shoulder, raising his weapon with the other hand. Alaric didn't hesitate. He slammed his foot on the accelerator. The Honda surged forward, blowing through the exit gate. The mercenary dove out of the way, firing 2 wild shots. One bullet shattered the Honda's rear tail light. The other sparked against the brick wall of the building. Alaric wrenched the steering wheel, taking a hard right onto the rain-slicked avenue, blending instantly into the sparse, late-night city traffic. He pushed the car as fast as it would go without drawing police attention, weaving through the back streets to hit the I-90 eastbound on-ramp. He glanced in the rearview mirror. Toby was looking out the window, mesmerized by the passing streetlights, blissfully unaware of how close they had just come to dying. Alaric gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. The encrypted USB drive sat heavy in his jacket pocket. He had escaped, but he was now a fugitive. He had assaulted corporate security, evaded armed mercenaries, and was carrying data that could dismantle a billion-dollar empire and send the city's police chief to federal prison. Beatrice Kensington would stop at nothing to hunt him down. She would freeze his accounts, put a warrant out for his arrest, and label him a thief or worse. But as Alaric sped toward the mountains, leaving the glittering skyline of Seattle behind, the fear began to recede, replaced by a dark, terrible resolve. Beatrice thought she was hunting a desperate, struggling single father. She thought she could silence him the way she had silenced Megan, the way she had silenced the cameras and the cops. She was wrong. Alaric wasn't running to hide. He was running to secure his son, and once Toby was safe behind the walls of Sarah's compound, Alaric was going to turn around, walk right back into the city, and burn Beatrice Kensington's empire to the ground. The relentless Seattle rain slowly turned into a harsh, blinding sleet as Alaric pushed his battered Honda Civic higher into the Cascade Mountains. The dashboard clock read 5:14 a.m. The heater was broken, blowing only lukewarm air, but Alaric barely felt the cold. His knuckles were permanently locked around the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the winding, treacherous logging road illuminated by his single working headlight. In the back seat, Toby was sound asleep, his small chest rising and falling rhythmically beneath Alaric's heavy winter coat. "Almost there, buddy," Alaric whispered to the rearview mirror, though he knew Toby couldn't hear him. 10 minutes later, the dense wall of pine trees broke, revealing a heavy iron gate blocking a dirt driveway. Standing on the other side, wearing a yellow high-visibility raincoat and holding a pump-action 12-gauge shotgun, was Sarah. She lowered the weapon as Alaric's car rolled to a stop. She punched a code into a rusted keypad, and the heavy gates groaned open. Alaric drove through, parking next to Sarah's massive, mud-caked Ford F-250 in front of a sprawling, log-built cabin. Sarah was opening the back door before Alaric even cut the engine. She scooped the sleeping Toby into her arms with practiced ease. "Get inside," she ordered, her voice tight. "I have a fire going and the perimeter cameras are active." Alaric grabbed the duffel bag and followed her inside. The cabin was a stark contrast to the sterile, terrifying world of Kensington Heights. It smelled of wood smoke, wet dog, and strong coffee. Sarah was a former park ranger who had retreated into the woods after her sister's death. She was tough, completely self-reliant, and loved Toby with a fierce, unwavering devotion. She carried Toby into a back bedroom, tucking him in before quietly shutting the door. When she returned to the kitchen, she found Alaric sitting at the scarred oak table, staring blankly at 3 black USB drives lined up perfectly in a row. Sarah poured a mug of black coffee and set it in front of him. She sat across the table, laying the shotgun across her lap. "Talk," she said simply. Alaric took a long, trembling breath. He looked up, and for the first time since he had seen the photograph on Beatrice Kensington's phone, the cold armor of adrenaline cracked. Tears welled in his eyes, spilling over his exhausted, soot-stained cheeks. "It wasn't an accident, Sarah," Alaric choked out, his voice breaking. "It wasn't some random drunk driver who panicked. I mean, he was drunk, but the police knew. They knew exactly who it was, and they covered it up." Sarah's expression hardened. The empathetic sister vanished, replaced by something dangerous. "Show me!" Alaric pulled his encrypted laptop from the duffel bag. It was an old, ruggedized Panasonic Toughbook he kept for field work. He plugged in the primary USB drive, booted the secure Linux environment, and brought up the files. He turned the screen toward her. Sarah stared at the high-resolution image of the crushed, charcoal gray Aston Martin DB11. She saw the blood on the hood. She saw the timestamp. Then, Alaric opened the extracted SMS text logs. Sarah read the frantic exchange between Leo Kensington and his sister, Beatrice. She read the damning confirmation that Police Captain Thomas Miller had orchestrated the blackout of the city traffic cameras and forged the alibi. The silence in the cabin stretched, heavy and suffocating. The only sound was the crackle of the wood stove. "Leo Kensington," Sarah whispered, her voice laced with pure venom. "That spoiled, useless parasite killed my sister, and his billionaire sister bought the police chief to sweep her off the pavement like trash. They traced my contractor file," Alaric said, rubbing his eyes. "They sent an armed tactical team to my apartment tonight. I barely got Toby out. They know I have the secure enclave chip. Beatrice Kensington will use every resource she has to hunt me down. If they catch me with this data, I'll disappear. And this all goes away forever." Sarah stood up, walking over to a heavy iron gun safe in the corner of the living room. She spun the dial, the heavy bolts clicking open. "Then we don't let them catch you. You stay here. We fortify this place. I have enough ammunition and supplies to hold off a private army for a month. Let them come into the woods." "No!" Alaric said, firmly, closing the laptop. "If I stay here, I put a target on Toby's back. Beatrice has infinite money. She can hire mercenaries, the drone operators, hackers. We can't win a siege against $1 billion empire. The only way to win is to destroy the empire." Sarah looked back at him, her hand resting on the cold steel of a hunting rifle. "What are you going to do, Artie? You're a tech repairman, not John Wick." "I know how networks work," Alaric said, a dark, intense focus returning to his hazel eyes. "I know how data flows. Beatrice relies on absolute control, on NDAs, on silence. If I go to the local FBI, Miller will intercept it. If I go to the news, Kensington Global's legal team will slap them with an injunction before they can publish a single word. The evidence has to be released everywhere, all at once, in a way she can't buy or threaten into silence." "How?" "I need to call Elias Finch." Sarah frowned. "The paranoid guy who wears a Faraday cage jacket. The one you used to do data wipes for. He's a rogue investigative journalist who runs a decentralized server network on the dark web. He hates corporate corruption more than he hates sunlight, but he won't do this over the phone. I have to go back into the city to meet him." Alaric stood up, grabbing his heavy canvas jacket. He checked his pockets, ensuring he had his primary tools: a precision multi-bit screwdriver, a pair of titanium tweezers, and a high-voltage USB killer drive. "Sarah, I need you to promise me something," Alaric said, looking her dead in the eye. "If I don't come back by tomorrow morning, you take Toby. You take the backup drive I left in the bag. You drive to the Canadian border, and you don't stop until you reach the federal authorities in Vancouver. You make them grant you asylum before you hand over the files." Sarah walked over to him. She didn't hug him. She just gripped his shoulder with terrifying strength. "You come back for your son, Alaric Burlington. Do you hear me? You burn that woman's life to ash, and you come back." "I will," Alaric promised. He stepped out into the freezing mountain air, climbing back into his shattered, bullet-creased car. The drive back into the belly of the beast had begun. The Pike Place Market was a chaotic labyrinth of tourists, fishmongers, and neon signs, smelling of salt water and deep-fried dough. Even on a miserable, rainy Wednesday afternoon, the lower subterranean levels, a maze of forgotten corridors and damp concrete alleys, were packed with people. It was the perfect place to disappear. Alaric sat at a sticky, warped wooden table in the back of a dingy, underground coffee shop that hadn't updated its decor since 1994. The loud hum of an ancient espresso machine covered any chance of remote audio surveillance. Sitting across from him was Elias Finch. Finch was terrifyingly thin, pale, and dressed in a bulky, silver-lined jacket designed to block RFID and cellular signals. His eyes darted nervously around the room, tracking every patron who walked through the door. "You're a dead man, Artie," Finch muttered, typing furiously on a heavily modified, thick-framed laptop that looked like a military relic. "I just pinged the SPD dispatch network. There's a silent, black book warrant out for your arrest. Armed and extremely dangerous. Suspected of corporate espionage and domestic terrorism. Captain Miller is running the op personally." "I assumed as much," Alaric said calmly, sipping his bitter coffee. "Can you build the switch?" Of course I can build the switch," Finch scoffed, insulted by the question. "I've already partitioned a decentralized blast protocol across 80 servers in 5 different countries. But Artie, this is nuclear. You're talking about taking down the Iron Widow. She owns half the judges in this state." "That's why we don't go to a judge," Alaric replied, sliding one of the black USB drives across the table. "You link this data to a dead man's switch on my phone. If I don't enter a randomly generated 6-digit cryptographic key every 45 minutes, the servers execute a mass email protocol. Every major news network in the world, the SEC, the FBI field offices in D.C., and every social media aggregator gets the text logs, the wire transfers, and the photos." Finch took the drive, his hands trembling slightly with adrenaline. "It's a suicide pact. If they capture you and lock you in a Faraday cage, the switch triggers. If they kill you, the switch triggers. But if they just shoot you in the head, you won't be around to see Beatrice fall." "They won't shoot me," Alaric said, his voice cold. "Beatrice doesn't know what I've done with the data yet. She needs to know if I've made copies. She needs to interrogate me. That's my leverage." Finch synced the drive, his screen flashing with lines of green code. "All right, the switch is live. You have an encrypted app on your new burner phone. Tap the icon, enter the code. You have 45 minutes on the clock, starting now." Alaric looked at his phone. A digital countdown timer appeared on the screen. 44:59. "Now what?" Finch asked, closing his laptop. "Now," Alaric said, standing up. "I force Beatrice out into the open." Alaric left the market and headed toward the upscale neighborhood of Belltown. Beatrice Kensington was too well protected in her glass tower. But her brother, Leo, was a different story. According to the metadata Alaric had scraped from the phone, Leo resided in a luxury penthouse at the Pinnacle, a building owned by Kensington Global. Alaric parked 3 blocks away and approached the building through a service alley. He didn't try to bluff the front desk. Instead, Alaric used his knowledge of elite building infrastructure. He picked the lock on the exterior utility door, slipping into the subterranean maintenance tunnels. He found the central telecom and security junction box. Using his micro-tools, Alaric bypassed the optical sensors, splicing a jumper wire into the primary biometric security feed. He didn't disable the cameras. That would trigger an alarm. He simply looped the feed from the previous 10 minutes, creating a digital ghost town. Alaric took the freight elevator to the top floor. The hallway was lined with imported marble. He approached Leo's door. It featured a state-of-the-art electronic deadbolt. Alaric pulled out his USB killer, a device disguised as a standard flash drive but packed with capacitors that discharged 240 volts of electricity into whatever it was plugged into. He jammed it into the lock's emergency diagnostic port. Crack! A spark of blue electricity shot out, the lock's internal motherboard frying instantly. The heavy oak door clicked ajar. Alaric pushed it open and stepped inside. The penthouse was a mess of empty liquor bottles, expensive designer clothes strewn across velvet couches, and the heavy smell of stale smoke. "Who's there?" a slurred, panicked voice called out from the living room. Alaric walked into the sunken living room. Leo Kensington was sprawling on a white leather sofa, holding a half-empty glass of scotch. He looked terrible, pale, bloated, and entirely consumed by the anxiety of his sister's tightening leash. Leo squinted at Alaric, attempting to stand, but stumbling backward. "Who the hell are you? How did you get in here? I'm calling security." Alaric didn't say a word. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, grabbed Leo by the collar of his silk shirt, and slammed him back down onto the coffee table. Glass shattered as Leo's drink hit the floor. "My name is Alaric Burlington," Alaric said, his face inches from Leo's, his voice a low, terrifying growl. "My wife's name was Megan, 3 years ago, on October 12th. You drove your Aston Martin into her at 60 miles an hour, and you left her there to die." Leo's eyes went wide with absolute, paralytic terror. All the blood drained from his face. No, you don't understand. It wasn't. I have the texts. Leo!" Alaric hissed, pressing his forearm against Leo's chest, pinning him down. "I have the photo of the car in the Medina garage. I have the wire transfers to Captain Miller. The world is going to know exactly what a pathetic, murderous coward you are." "Please!" Leo shrieked, tears of sheer panic streaming down his face. "B handled it. She told me it was handled. She said no one would ever know. I didn't mean to. I was drunk. She came out of nowhere." Hearing the pathetic confession, hearing the absolute lack of remorse, only a desperate desire for self-preservation, made Alaric want to wrap his hands around Leo's throat and squeeze until the world went dark. But Alaric closed his eyes, thinking of Toby. He needed Leo alive. He needed Leo to be the bait. Alaric pulled Leo up by his hair, shoving him onto the sofa. "Tonight is the Kensington Global Charity Gala at the Seattle Art Museum. Your sister is giving the keynote address. You are going to go to that gala, and you are going to text her right now, telling her that the tech repairman is coming to meet her there, and that he has everything." "She'll kill me," Leo sobbed. "She'll ruin me." "If you don't do it," Alaric said, pulling his heavy steel wrench from his belt and letting it tap against his palm. "I'm going to take a photo of you, right here, and attach it to the data dump going to the FBI in exactly..." Alaric checked his phone. 22 minutes. Type. Trembling uncontrollably, Leo pulled out his phone and typed the message. Alaric watched it send. The trap was set. The Iron Widow was going to be forced out of her web, right into the center of a public stage where she couldn't hide behind her private security. The Seattle Art Museum was bathed in the harsh, glaring light of hundreds of flashbulbs. The red carpet was rolled out across the wet pavement, welcoming the city's elite, politicians and celebrities. The Kensington Global Charity Gala was the social event of the year, a masterclass in public relations designed to paint Beatrice Kensington as a benevolent titan of industry. Alaric walked through the loading dock entrance. He was dressed in a crisp black catering uniform he had acquired from a supply closet in Leo's building. He carried a tray of champagne flutes, his head bowed, perfectly blending into the army of invisible staff making the night possible. The main atrium was spectacular. Towering glass sculptures hung from the ceiling, refracting the ambient light over hundreds of guests dressed in tuxedos and designer gowns. A massive, high-definition LED screen spanned the entire back wall behind the grand stage, currently displaying the Kensington Global logo in looping gold animation. Alaric checked his burner phone. 4:12. 4 minutes until the dead man's switch triggered. He quickly typed in the 6-digit alphanumeric code Finch had given him. Timer reset. 45 for bus course. He had bought himself one final window. Alaric navigated through the crowd, heading toward the rear of the stage. He spotted Captain Thomas Miller standing near the VIP tables. Miller was in his dress uniform, laughing with a local senator, looking every bit the decorated hero. Alaric felt bile rise in his throat, but he kept moving. He slipped past a heavy velvet curtain and entered the temporary AV control booth set up for the event. A single technician sat at a massive mixing board, wearing noise-canceling headphones, entirely engrossed in a monitor showing camera angles. Alaric stepped behind him. He didn't use violence. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the titanium tweezers, and expertly jammed them into the primary cooling fan of the technician's secondary rendering tower. Grrr, snap. The fan blades shattered. The machine shrieked, a loud hardware fault alarm blaring in the technician's headphones. The tech cursed, ripping off his headphones and diving under the desk to inspect the sparking tower. In those 5 seconds, Alaric stepped over him, plugged his encrypted USB drive directly into the master broadcast terminal, and executed a ruthless override script he and Finch had pre-compiled. The script locked out the local keyboard and transferred absolute display control to Alaric's burner phone. Alaric calmly walked out of the booth, abandoning the tray of champagne. He moved to the side of the stage, standing in the shadows, just behind the heavy curtains. From here, he had a perfect view of the podium. The crowd fell silent as a string quartet finished their piece. The lights dimmed. Beatrice Kensington walked onto the stage. She looked immaculate, an absolute vision of power and composure in a sweeping, midnight blue gown. She stepped up to the microphone, her icy blue eyes scanning the crowd. If she was panicked by Leo's text, she didn't show a single ounce of it. "Thank you," Beatrice said, her voice echoing through the massive atrium, smooth and commanding. "Tonight, we are not just celebrating the architectural achievements of Kensington Global. We are celebrating community. We are celebrating safety, integrity, and the unbreakable bonds that hold our great city together." Alaric pulled out his phone. He opened the remote execution app. "Safety," Alaric whispered to himself. He pressed execute. "On the stage," Beatrice continued, "when my late husband founded this company, he believed that transparency." Behind her, the massive LED screen abruptly flickered. The looping gold Kensington logo vanished. A high-pitched feedback whine ripped through the speakers, making several guests wince and cover their ears. Suddenly, the screen illuminated with a blinding, high-resolution photograph. It was the charcoal gray Aston Martin DB11. The hood was crushed, the violent scrape highly visible. The metadata stamp in the corner was blown up to massive proportions. October 12th, 11:43 p.m. A collective gasp echoed through the atrium. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Beatrice stopped mid-sentence. She turned around. For the first time in her life, the Iron Widow's mask of absolute control shattered. Her face went pale, her jaw tightening as she stared at the 50-foot-wide image of her brother's crime. "Turn it off!" a voice boomed from the crowd. It was Captain Miller, violently shoving his way toward the stage, his face red with panic. "Cut the power to the screen," but the AV tech was already locked out. Alaric tapped his phone screen again. The image shifted. It was now a split screen. On the left were the text messages. The massive font made them readable from the back of the room. L.E.O.K. She stepped out of nowhere. "Beatrice K. Shut up and listen. I am calling Captain Miller now. The cameras will go dark. On the right side of the screen, the wire transfer receipts appeared, highlighting the $500,000 sent to an offshore account linked to Thomas Miller." The murmurs in the crowd erupted into a deafening roar. Journalists who were there to cover a charity event were suddenly screaming into their phones or recording the massive screens. Senators and socialites physically backed away from Beatrice as if she were radioactive. Captain Miller froze halfway to the stage. Several of his own subordinate officers, who were working off-duty security at the event, were staring at the screen, and then at him, their hands slowly resting on their duty belts. Beatrice looked out at the chaos. Her empire, her reputation, her absolute immunity. All of it was disintegrating in real time, broadcast to the most powerful people in the state. She turned her head, her sharp eyes scanning the shadows off stage. She saw him. Alaric stepped out from behind the curtain. He wasn't hiding anymore. He stood in the harsh spill of the stage lights, looking directly at the woman who had ruined his life. Beatrice's chest heaved. She walked toward the edge of the stage, ignoring the screaming crowd. She stopped 10 feet from Alaric. "You think you've won?" Beatrice hissed, her voice trembling with a terrifying rage, low enough that the microphone didn't catch it. "You think this changes anything? I will drag you through the courts for a decade. I will bury you and that child of yours." Alaric looked at her. He didn't feel anger anymore. He just felt an overwhelming, profound pity for the hollow, desperate woman standing in front of him. "I don't need to win," Alaric said calmly. "I just needed to break the machine." Alaric pulled his burner phone from his pocket. He looked at the timer. 41:12. He dropped the phone onto the hard stage floor, raised his boot, and crushed it into pieces. The dead man's switch was broken. In exactly 41 minutes, the master data dump would hit every federal agency and news desk in the country. There was no stopping it. No amount of money could buy silence on this scale. "It's over, Beatrice," Alaric said. Sirens began to wail in the distance, growing louder by the second. Not local police dispatched by Miller, but federal agents alerted by the initial data spikes Finch had engineered to bypass local precincts. Alaric turned his back on Beatrice Kensington and walked away. He pushed his way through the loading dock doors, stepping out into the cold, clean Seattle rain. He didn't stick around to watch the FBI storm the gala. He didn't stay to watch Captain Miller get stripped of his badge or see Beatrice led out in handcuffs. The news would cover all of that tomorrow. Alaric walked to his battered Honda. He sat in the driver's seat, turning the key. The engine sputtered, then roared to life. He drove eastward, away from the glittering, corrupted skyline toward the mountains. The storm was finally breaking. As he navigated the winding logging road hours later, the first rays of dawn began to peek over the jagged peaks, painting the sky in soft hues of orange and gold. When he reached the cabin, the heavy iron gate was already open. Sarah was standing on the porch, a steaming mug of coffee in her hand, a sad but deeply relieved smile on her face. Alaric parked the car and killed the engine. He walked up the wooden steps. "Did you do it?" Sarah asked softly. Alaric looked at his hands. They were no longer the hands of a desperate, grieving victim. They were the hands of a father who had fought for his family and won. "I did," Alaric said, From inside the cabin, he heard the familiar, wonderful sound of Toby's footsteps running toward the door. "Dad!" Toby yelled, throwing the screen door open and crashing into Alaric's legs. "You came back!" Alaric dropped to his knees, wrapping his arms tightly around his son, burying his face in Toby's messy hair. For the first time in 3 years, the hollow ache in Alaric's chest began to fill with light. "I'm right here, buddy," Alaric whispered, tears of profound peace falling freely. "I'm right here, and I'm never leaving." And that is how a simple phone repair brought down a corrupt empire. Alaric didn't have $1 billion or a private army, but he had something much more powerful: a father's love and the undeniable truth. What would you have done if you found that photo on the broken screen? Would you have taken the hush money and stayed quiet, or risked it all for justice? Let me know in the comments below. If Alaric's incredible revenge had your heart racing, hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more explosive real-life thrillers.